So without wasting any more time, I'm going to introduce the first panelist, Puleng Plessie, who is going to be presenting her work on her projects on arts education, and I think I'll just leave it to you to get into your work and your presentation. You're not going to use the mic?
No, I'm okay. Can everybody hear me? There's something about podiums, that just makes me edgy. So I just prefer to be a little bit more closer to you guys as if I'm having a conversation with you. So this research explores the notion of facilitating through dialogue to better understand pedagogy in arts education. Facilitation plays a critical role in the implementation of arts educational programs. This research argues that the facilitation process should be dialogical interaction with learners, not one that is authoritarian. For recording purposes. My understanding of authoritarian is borrowed from Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire, who was the leading advocate of critical pedagogy and dialogical relationships in teaching and learning. He refers to this concept as the banking concept of education. In his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where the teacher teaches and the students are taught. The teacher knows everything, the students know nothing. The teacher talks, the students listen meekly. The teacher is the subject in the learning process while the pupils are mere objects. Freire argues that this banking concept of education, because this is the banking concept of education, because the teacher deposits their knowledge onto learners. Learners then receive, file, and store this knowledge by memorizing, repeating that which the teacher has deposited. Freire advises that this student-teacher relationship should merge and allow transformation, creativity, and knowledge for both the teacher and the learner. Freire calls this process the problem-posing education, which is a way of learning and unlearning through dialogue. Freire states that through dialogue, the teacher of the students and the students of the teacher cease to exist, and a new term emerges. The teacher-student with the two student-teachers. Sounds like a rhyme. The teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but the one who himself is taught in dialogue with the students, whom in turn, while being taught, also teach. They become jointly responsible for this process, which they all grow. Here we see a merging relationship between the teacher and the students, and this is basically what I would call inkulumo mpendulwano. Inkulumo mpendulwano is a Zulu hyphenated word which comes closest to the the dialogical pedagogies I seek to understand. Broken down, inkulumo means to talk or to have a conversation, and mpendulwano means to respond. This call and respond method of Nkulumo Mpendulwano not only emphasizes facilitations which can be adapted in classroom as well as curated spaces, but its relevance is also the relevance of language and terminologies used to localize content. Professor and Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o expresses his dissatisfaction in African literature in speaking African literature in English, the European language. I further argue that these certain terminologies in the facilitation process are crucial and evident for localizing content, such as the word history. In isiZulu, there is no history, no masculine, no feminine, but rather umlando. Umlando is a word used to define a plant. Is used to define a stem of a plant or a story. Now this stem story represents time, the beginning or the core essence of the story. This sharing of stories into simplified tales, storytelling and reenactment would be something many of us grew up calling inganekwane. Inganekwane is an indigenous folk tale that not only tells the story, but in itself becomes a learning tool and inkulumo pendulwano encounter. An example of umlando and inganekwane derives from last night's conversation of the cameraman. Yeah? I've been going back. Okay, there you go. Of the cameraman, photographer, timekeeper. Yeah, it got to that too. And this masculine and feminine conversation. The struggle is not finding the function of what this person does or what it represents or what he or she represents in a particular. The struggle is not finding the function or what this person does or represents. But the particular problem is the term or the name used associated with this person. So for example, yesterday we all knew and could relate to the cameraman, what they did, how the stories related to us growing up and what that meant in terms of him being a community person. But we somehow struggled with the name and the term cameraman versus, the photographer. So these are the conversations. Ne? I'd like to give a brief case study on a project entitled 2010 Reasons to Live in a Small Town. 2010 Reasons to Live in a Small Town, in 2010, which engages contemporary art in rural communities and public spaces. This project was implemented with arts practitioners who had to reimagine public spaces by exploring the place and community in different provinces of South Africa. Living Within History is one of those projects which draws on how history is founded on small narratives. Conceptual artist and educator Balkan Sadi and Neil Koppen, writer and director and designer, were facilitators of this project, which introduced a series of performance-based workshops with learners in the community. So these series of performances, the first one actually started off when they identified an abandoned plot. In this abandoned plot, they asked participants to actually look at the space and try to speak about what they imagined the space was. And they had to also reenact that, pretend like the space existed. So they'd come inside, open the door, as if the door existed, close the door, and as people were passing by, they would look at them as foolish, saying, "Okanti, what's going on? Why are these people doing what they are doing?" The second phase was when Sadi and Kupen actually asked the viewers, the pass-buyers, to actually be part of that process, and started making stories and inganekwane, so to say, about really what the space was about, and started actually deepening that in terms of the history of the Dandi project. This is basically what the third phase was. So you would see intergenerational interactions. You would see what was on the wall was basically these enactments and historical conversations about the space, spoken by the community and also the participants. So then the facilitator, therefore, is not just in it and ruling the conversations, but he's actually taking a step back and allowing the community to inform as well as give historical content. The last phase of this project was something we call, it was as isiZulu performance. So the following interaction, I'll read this part, the following interaction of the wall was several performances of Dandi local artists. This simplistic yet effective intergenerational Zulu performance is participatory, inviting the audience to be part of it by voluntary clap, singing, and at times you'll find audience member coming into the stage and being part of the performance. This sensory experience does not proclaim its success by the outcomes of perfectly written scripts, live bands, and perfect pitch voices, but rather a participation and collaboration. This community engagement is one that plays a critical role in Nkulumo Mpendulwano. It involves storytelling, sharing of stories, engaging, participating, and where the stage does not belong to a particular figure, like how I'm feeling right now, but it's actually shared by everyone. This is evidence and should be evident also in arts education. However, now this is where the problem starts. However, the Nkulumo Mpendulwano pedagogy lacks expressive and visible presence from the facilitators. This may, again, well, this is the conversation we'll probably have later. It lacks presence and presence from the facilitators, Sadi and Kopin. In this project, participants seem to be the ones who are facilitating the process, and the community members inform each other through the process. This made me question the language of instruction of the Living Within Histories project. Sadi and Kopin are English-speaking white males who, for 2010 Reasons to Live in a Small Town project, were commissioned for a small project that was conceived in a small rural community, which was mainly Dundee, which was mainly predominantly a Zulu-dominated area. The collective had a Zulu-speaking facilitator, Bonkosi Ngubeze, who acted as the translator and tour guide, explaining the aims and outcomes of the project, as well as the facilitation process. Kotsia writes about award-winning author Johnny Steinberg, who travels to a small rural community in Eastern Cape to explore the AIDS epidemic and lives in that community for the duration of his research. In this book, Three-Letter Plague, Steinberg refers to the translator introduced as Usizwe, who is a small business owner. Now, Usizwe acted as a guide to Steinberg's interaction in the community, but Sizwe became more than just the subject of this book and Steinberg's interaction with the community. Despite the educational hierarchies, despite the educational hierarchies and differences, Kotsia mentions that Sizwe's role as the facilitator became more complex, where there were moments of conversations and silences which gave meaning to the education and the knowledge. I realized that the Nkulumo Mpendulwano process within the Living Within History project may have been embedded within Ngubeze, who, in my opinion, became the facilitator, mediator, not only for the participants, but for Sadi and Kopin. Sadi and Kopin's conversations, silences. Okay, it was blank anyway. Sadi and Kopin's conversations, silences, communications, and miscommunications were further elaborated when an author and contributor of the 2010 Reasons to Live in a Small Town book, Rita Sitas, titles the performances and closing as Dada in Dundee, and reenacting, the other title was reenacting the archive Dada again in Dundee. Knowing very well that Dada is a westernized concept, knowing very well that Dada is a westernized concept which showed which was shoved into not only Africa, not only South Africa, not only KZN, but into a Dundee content. It had been made clear to me that Ngubeze was indeed, in my opinion, the crucial facilitator of this project. This is a clear example of Nkulumo Mpendulwano interactions and encounters. Ngiyabonga. Fine, perfect. Okay, now I'm going to get a little interaction and engagement with you, because obviously for me I speak a lot in terms of terms and education and artistic practices. So Dr. Same is going to help hand out some pieces of paper. I have my fingers crossed, hoping you have a pen. I'd like to start to reimagine language in terms of arts education, of educational practices. And I'd like, please, if you guys could contribute by giving a word in your own vernacular in terms of an alternative word for arts education. Yeah. And as I sit down, I'll let you chew on it, and when we leave, I'm gonna take my papers back. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So that was